Hey guys, tonight we're going to journey into the life of someone who defined an entire civilization, Cleopatra. You've probably heard the stories, queen, lover, political mastermind, but she was so much more than that. In fact, you probably won't survive in her world for even a day. Trust me, it was a jungle out there. You think traffic's stressful? Try navigating royal family drama, military invasions, and the Roman Empire all while holding onto your crown. Now, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious about where everyone is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Cleopatra was born in 69 BC into a world of intrigue, power struggles, and, like most of ancient Egypt, mystery. To say she was born into royalty would be an understatement. Cleopatra was part of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek family that ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great's death. Her father, Ptolemy XII, ruled Egypt but was a weak king, often dealing with corrupt advisors and an empire on the brink of financial ruin. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra's father truly had control of Egypt during her childhood, or if he was merely a puppet king. Regardless, Cleopatra's early life was anything but peaceful. At a young age, Cleopatra watched her father's kingdom struggle, and she likely grew up with the understanding that her role was more than just being a figurehead. As a child, Cleopatra was said to be quite intelligent, learning not only the Egyptian language but also Greek and Latin. By the time she reached her teenage years, she was more than capable of understanding the complexities of ruling a kingdom. It was clear that she was different from many other royals, and her sharp mind would become one of her greatest tools. But it wasn't all intellect and royal strategy. Cleopatra's early life was full of the kind of drama that would have made a reality TV producer salivate. She had a brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was the same age as her, and together they were meant to rule Egypt. But, as often happens in royal families, things didn't go according to plan. Ptolemy XIII, who had been crowned as co-ruler, decided to push Cleopatra out of power. This led to a fierce rivalry between the siblings that would soon come to a head. But Cleopatra wasn't just going to sit back and let her brother take control. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's first political move was out of sheer necessity or calculated brilliance, but either way, it set the stage for her rise to power. At just 18 years old, Cleopatra managed to get herself exiled from the throne by her brother's forces. That's right, a teenager was exiled from her own kingdom. But this wasn't the end of her story. No, Cleopatra wasn't one to give up easily. While in exile, Cleopatra spent her time building her strength, forging alliances, and planning her return. But it wasn't until a chance encounter with Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, that she truly began to shine. Cleopatra wasn't just a queen in name. She was a force to be reckoned with. Cleopatra's story took a dramatic turn the moment Julius Caesar stepped onto the scene. You may think of him as a great general, but when it comes to Cleopatra, his role was far more complicated. Imagine being in her shoes. Your kingdom is on the brink of collapse, your brother's trying to kill you, and then, out of nowhere, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire sails into your world. It's the kind of moment that feels more like a movie than real life. But, then again, Cleopatra was no stranger to the extraordinary. Cleopatra's first meeting with Caesar wasn't under the most glamorous of circumstances. After being exiled by her brother Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra had been living in relative obscurity. But when Caesar came to Egypt in pursuit of his political enemies, the meeting wasn't just a stroke of luck, it was destiny. Cleopatra, desperate to regain her throne, knew she needed to make an impression. Historians still argue whether she had already planned to meet Caesar or if it was purely by chance, but the encounter would change the course of history forever. In a story that has become part of the legendary Cleopatra lore, it's said that Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence rolled up in a carpet. Think about that for a moment. being carried into a room in a rug, in hopes of gaining the favor of the most powerful man in the world. It wasn't the most conventional of entrances, but it certainly grabbed Caesar's attention. The carpet was unrolled and there she was, Cleopatra, a queen in exile but with the ambition of an empire. Caesar was immediately taken with her, not just because of her beauty, though she certainly had that, but because of her sharp intellect and political savvy. Cleopatra wasn't just a pretty face, she knew exactly what to say and when to say it. Her knowledge of Roman politics, her fluency in Greek, and her ability to engage Caesar in meaningful conversation made her someone Caesar respected, more than he had probably expected. And here's where things get interesting. Although Cleopatra and Caesar didn't exactly start out as lovers, their relationship quickly evolved into something far more complicated. Cleopatra saw in Caesar not just an ally, but a powerful protector. As for Caesar, Cleopatra was no mere foreign queen. She was an enigma, a woman with the kind of charm and intelligence that could make even the most seasoned Roman politician rethink his alliances. Their relationship was equal parts political maneuvering and personal attraction. Historians still argue whether Caesar truly loved Cleopatra or whether he saw her as just another means to an end, another puppet to control. Regardless of his personal feelings, Cleopatra wasn't about to let the opportunity slip through her fingers. Through her relationship with Caesar, Cleopatra was able to regain her throne. But her ambitions didn't stop there. Cleopatra was shrewd enough to realize that Caesar wasn't the endgame, he was a stepping stone. With Caesar's support, she began to reclaim the power that had been taken from her. But just when she thought things were settling into place, history had a way of throwing curveballs. But as always in royal courts, the world was never as calm as it seemed. Cleopatra's rise was met with more challenges, including the imminent arrival of her brother Ptolemy Xi's army, who was still trying to claim the throne. Caesar, despite his support of Cleopatra, wasn't immune to political pressures of his own. While they spent time together in Alexandria, Caesar was also dealing with problems back home, including the tumultuous political landscape in Rome. As Cleopatra continued to leverage her relationship with Caesar, it became clear that this was more than just a passing affair. It was a strategic partnership. And this partnership would lead to one of the most famous unions in history. So, here you are, in ancient Alexandria, watching Cleopatra and Julius Caesar carve their place in history. They weren't just lovers, not even just rulers. They were players in a grand game of politics, and their every move carried the weight of empires. Cleopatra's cunning wasn't just about beauty or charm. It was her ability to see the big picture and act accordingly. For Cleopatra, being queen was never about just holding a title. It was about power, survival, and ensuring her legacy. At the heart of Cleopatra's rise to power was her extraordinary intellect. She wasn't content to just be a figurehead as many queens were. No, Cleopatra took it upon herself to be an active participant in the governance of Egypt, and she did so with an understanding of politics, philosophy, and diplomacy that was rare for women in her time. Historians have long debated whether Cleopatra's ability to speak multiple languages was a sign of her intelligence or simply a tool she used to gain power, but the fact remains, she was highly educated, deeply knowledgeable about Egyptian culture, and adept at navigating the complex political landscapes of both Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra spoke several languages including Egyptian, Greek, and Latin. This made her not only a skilled diplomat but also a person of great cultural understanding. Most Egyptian pharaohs, including Cleopatra's ancestors, spoke Greek as the Ptolemaic dynasty was of Greek origin. But Cleopatra was the first in her family to learn Egyptian and, perhaps most importantly, to embrace Egyptian culture. She wasn't just ruling Egypt, she was embodying it, embracing its gods and presenting herself as the true heir of the ancient pharaohs. This linguistic talent didn't just make her a competent ruler, it made her a force in her own right. Historians still argue about the extent to which Cleopatra used her intellect to manipulate people and circumstances to her advantage. Some say she was a master of political gamesmanship, always several steps ahead of her rivals. Others believe that her political maneuvers were more a product of necessity than ambition. But one thing is certain: Cleopatra's intelligence made her an exceptional ruler in a world where women rarely had that kind of power. Her brilliance extended to the political stage as well. Cleopatra had a keen understanding of Roman politics, and she used that to her advantage. Rome was at a turning point, and Cleopatra wasn't blind to the opportunities that lay ahead. When she aligned herself with Caesar, she made sure that her actions didn't just benefit her personally, they were calculated to secure her position in the power structures of both Egypt and Rome. But Cleopatra's intelligence wasn't just about her political prowess, it was about her ability to read people. She understood the motivations of those around her, from Caesar to her own family. This ability to analyze and predict others' behavior allowed her to make decisions that ensured her survival and eventual dominance. Whether it was winning Caesar's affection or managing the complex relationships within her family, Cleopatra knew exactly how to play the game. Yet, with all her political acumen and intelligence, Cleopatra wasn't immune to the challenges of the world she lived in. The stakes were high and the threats to her power were constant. She was constantly fighting not just for her throne but for the survival of her entire kingdom. Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar was a major turning point in her reign, but it was also fraught with danger. Despite their alliance, Cleopatra had to navigate the shifting tides of Roman politics and contend with the ever-present threat from her brother's supporters. It was during this time that Cleopatra began to truly solidify her place in history, not just as a queen, but as a brilliant tactician who could hold her own in the cutthroat world of Roman politics. She wasn't just a figurehead, she was an active, strategic player in the game of empire building. And while Cleopatra's intelligence was certainly one of her greatest assets, it was her adaptability that allowed her to thrive in a world full of uncertainty. She could switch between cultures, languages, and political allegiances with ease, always knowing which path to take, always staying one step ahead. Her ability to evolve in response to her changing circumstances would be key to her long-lasting influence. Cleopatra's reign was defined by many battles. Some fought on the battlefield, others in the heart of Rome itself. But one thing remained clear throughout: she wasn't just a woman who inherited a throne, she was a queen who would go down in history as one of the greatest rulers of her time. And as we continue on with her story, we'll see just how far her political brilliance and unyielding ambition would take her. Now that Cleopatra had secured her throne with the help of Julius Caesar, she wasn't about to let her power slip through her fingers. Egypt was hers to command, but the real work was just beginning. As clever and politically astute as she was, Cleopatra needed to make sure that her reign was stable, her enemies were at bay, and her alliances, particularly with Rome, remained strong. But there was something even more critical on the horizon: the survival of her dynasty and the future of Egypt itself. Cleopatra was well aware that Egypt wasn't just another kingdom, it was an empire that had lasted for centuries. She had inherited a rich history and culture, but also a weakened kingdom that was under constant threat. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which her family had ruled for nearly 300 years, was on shaky ground. The financial situation was dire, and the threat from rival factions within Egypt, not to mention Roman interference, loomed large. Cleopatra's task wasn't just to reign, she had to restore Egypt to its former glory. While her relationship with Caesar was one of the most public aspects of her reign, Cleopatra's true genius lay in her political maneuvering behind closed doors. With Caesar's support, she solidified her hold over Egypt, but her real brilliance was in how she navigated the shifting tides of Roman politics. She had to make sure that Egypt's interests were protected while balancing her relationship with Caesar and his rivals in Rome. But Caesar wasn't the only Roman leader she needed to keep an eye on. The political landscape in Rome was volatile, and Cleopatra had to stay ahead of the game. Cleopatra's political savvy extended beyond her relationship with Caesar. She was a master of diplomacy, forging alliances with Rome's most powerful figures. But just as important as these political alliances was Cleopatra's ability to manage the internal politics of Egypt. Her court was filled with rivals and potential enemies, and she had to be constantly vigilant to maintain control. Historians still debate how much of her reign was the result of personal ambition versus a genuine desire to protect Egypt from Roman domination. Regardless of her motivations, Cleopatra was unrelenting in her pursuit of power and stability. Her ability to maintain control of Egypt while balancing the demands of Rome was no small feat. Her political maneuvering was relentless, and she knew exactly how to play the cards she had. Some argue that Cleopatra's greatest strength wasn't just her intellect, but her ability to charm and manipulate the people around her. Her charm was legendary, both as a lover and as a political player. But beneath that charm lay a steely determination and a mind that was always working, always calculating. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. Cleopatra had to deal with constant challenges to her throne, and as history shows, no one in ancient Egypt ever truly ruled without facing opposition. Her own brother, Ptolemy XIII, was one of her most persistent enemies. While Caesar was in Egypt, Cleopatra was forced to face a rebellion led by Ptolemy's forces. The young king, backed by his advisors, tried to reclaim the throne, but Cleopatra, with Caesar's support, was able to defeat him. In the end, Ptolemy XIII was drowned in the Nile, marking the end of his short and tumultuous reign. But Cleopatra wasn't just dealing with family drama. Her court was filled with intrigue, and maintaining control over Egypt required constant vigilance. She was not only a queen but a strategist who had to navigate her relationships with the elite of Egypt, while also maintaining her alliances with powerful Romans like Julius Caesar and later, Mark Antony. But Cleopatra's ambitions extended far beyond Egypt. As we continue to follow her rise to power, it becomes clear that she wasn't content with just ruling over Egypt. She had her sights set on a larger role in the Mediterranean world, and that meant ensuring Egypt's place at the table of Roman power. Her relationships with Caesar and Antony were part of her larger strategy to secure Egypt's future and, in her mind, Egypt's place in the world. She wasn't just playing a political game, she was playing for the survival of her kingdom and possibly her dynasty. While Cleopatra had her enemies, both within Egypt and across the Mediterranean, she was a ruler who always kept her options open. Her diplomatic skills and ability to make strategic alliances were vital in keeping Egypt independent and strong. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And as we'll see in the next section, her relationships with powerful men would continue to shape her legacy. Cleopatra wasn't just a ruler, she was a master of navigating the labyrinthine world of Roman politics. Her relationship with Julius Caesar may have been the most famous in history, but it wasn't just about love or power, it was about survival both for herself and for Egypt. The intertwining of politics and passion was a delicate dance, and Cleopatra, ever the strategist, knew how to balance both. Now, it's one thing to have a relationship with a powerful man, but Cleopatra's partnership with Caesar was anything but ordinary. Caesar was, after all, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire. He was a conqueror, a general, and a leader who commanded respect and fear across the known world. But for Cleopatra, Caesar wasn't just a ruler or a lover. He was her ally in a time when Egypt's very existence was at risk. Caesar's support allowed Cleopatra to solidify her power within Egypt, but it also meant that she was entwined in the larger game of Roman politics. Cleopatra wasn't naive. She knew that Rome's influence was growing, and her kingdom couldn't survive on its own without securing the favor of the most powerful empire in the world. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar was purely political or if there was genuine affection between them. It's likely that it was a bit of both. What is clear, however, is that their bond was one of mutual benefit. For Cleopatra, it meant securing her throne and Egypt's stability. For Caesar, it meant having a loyal ally in the East, a valuable resource in his bid for even greater power. They both had something to gain, and they both played their parts in a high-stakes political drama. Together, Cleopatra and Caesar became an unstoppable force, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. Their relationship had consequences, not just for Egypt but for the entire Roman world. In 47 BC, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Caesar, which only further cemented her ties to Caesar. But when Caesar returned to Rome, he left Cleopatra behind in Egypt. This would be the beginning of a long separation, one that would have profound effects on both their fates. Despite their bond, Caesar's political ambitions in Rome meant that he couldn't stay in Egypt for long, and Cleopatra had to continue her reign alone. But even in his absence, Cleopatra kept her ties to Caesar strong, ensuring her position as one of the most powerful women in the world. While Caesar's return to Rome was crucial to his career, it also marked a shift in Cleopatra's own journey. Her influence in Rome had been cemented through her relationship with Caesar, but now she had to figure out how to secure Egypt's future without him by her side. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra ever truly loved Caesar, or whether she was simply playing a part in a much larger game. Regardless of the nature of their relationship, one thing was clear: Cleopatra was no mere pawn. She had used Caesar as much as he had used her, and now, it was time for her to take the reins on her own. As Cleopatra continued to rule Egypt in Caesar's absence, the political landscape began to shift once again. Caesar's assassination in 44 BC left a power vacuum in Rome, and the entire Roman world was thrown into chaos. Cleopatra, who had been intimately involved in the politics of Rome, saw the opportunity to forge a new alliance, this time with Mark Antony, one of Caesar's most loyal generals. Antony was a man of considerable power, and Cleopatra knew that his support could help her maintain Egypt's independence, as well as bolster her position in the greater Mediterranean world. The relationship between Cleopatra and Antony is one of the most famous in history, not just because of the passion that burned between them, but because of the political ramifications it had. When Cleopatra and Antony became lovers, they didn't just create a bond between themselves, they created a political powerhouse. Together, they formed a formidable alliance that would challenge the future of Rome. But like her relationship with Caesar, their union was a calculated move. Cleopatra knew that aligning herself with Antony would allow her to maintain her position as one of the most powerful figures in the Mediterranean world. But just like her relationship with Caesar, Cleopatra's connection with Antony would not be without complications. While their relationship was politically advantageous for both parties, it was also a source of tension and conflict, both within Egypt and across the Roman Empire. Their affair was viewed with suspicion by many in Rome, particularly by Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. Antony's loyalty to Cleopatra was seen as a threat to Rome's power, and Octavian used it as a political weapon to turn Rome against both Cleopatra and Antony. The love affair between Cleopatra and Antony may have been a strategic move, but it wasn't just about politics. It was a deeply emotional connection that would have lasting consequences for both of them. And as history shows, Cleopatra wasn't one to shy away from difficult decisions. Her ability to navigate the most treacherous political waters, while maintaining her relationships with two of Rome's most powerful men, is a testament to her extraordinary cunning and ambition. Cleopatra's life was defined by power, ambition, and complex relationships, none more so than the one she shared with her family. While history often paints her as a queen caught in the struggles between Rome and Egypt, the true drama of her reign unfolded in her very own court. Cleopatra's royal family was a cauldron of intrigue, betrayal, and rivalry, and she was no stranger to the toxic dynamics that come with power. Cleopatra's relationship with her siblings was far from a harmonious one. As the eldest child of Ptolemy XII, Cleopatra had a brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was her co-ruler for a time. But the sibling bond quickly soured. Ptolemy XIII was a mere boy when he was thrust into power, and his reign was mostly controlled by his advisors. Cleopatra, however, was a shrewd and capable ruler, and she knew that the stability of Egypt lay in her hands. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra's push to take full control was out of necessity or ambition, but it was clear that her younger brother, aided by his advisors, became an obstacle. In a turn of events that would have made any royal family drama look tame, Ptolemy XIII took advantage of the situation and attempted to oust Cleopatra from the throne, forcing her into exile. The young king, backed by a faction of courtiers, believed that he could rule Egypt without his older sister. But Cleopatra was no ordinary royal, and she wasn't about to surrender without a fight. With the help of Caesar, she managed to return to Egypt and reclaim her throne. But the relationship between the two siblings remained deeply fractured. Cleopatra's brother was eventually found dead, believed to have drowned in the Nile under mysterious circumstances, and Cleopatra was once again the sole ruler of Egypt. But family drama didn't end there. Cleopatra's other siblings, her sisters Arsinoe IV and Berenice IV, also played pivotal roles in the intrigue that surrounded her reign. Arsinoe IV, for example, was not content to stay out of the spotlight. She became an active political rival, even leading a revolt against Cleopatra while Cleopatra was in Rome. Cleopatra had Arsinoe captured and exiled to Rome, where she eventually met a tragic end, killed in the orders of none other than Julius Caesar. But Arsinoe's death wasn't just the end of a sibling rivalry, it was a crucial moment in Cleopatra's consolidation of power. She had eliminated her threats, but her family's bloodshed had left scars that would shape the rest of her reign. In addition to her political rivals, Cleopatra had to navigate the complex dynamics of the Egyptian court, where intrigue was rampant and alliances were fleeting. Her court was filled with individuals who were only too eager to see her fail, and Cleopatra's ability to manage these tensions became one of her greatest strengths. She could never truly relax. Her position was always precarious, and she constantly had to make decisions that would ensure her survival. Yet, despite the betrayals, power struggles, and endless scheming that characterized her family's politics, Cleopatra managed to hold onto her crown and navigate the ever-changing political currents of Egypt and Rome. She was ruthless when she needed to be, but also extraordinarily skilled at forming alliances, securing her place in history. It was her ability to manipulate these family relationships and turn enemies into allies that made her one of the most fascinating rulers in history. Cleopatra wasn't just a queen who inherited power, she was a woman who fought tooth and nail to keep it. What makes Cleopatra's family history so compelling is not just the constant drama, it's how she used her family's conflicts to her advantage. While her siblings fought for the throne, Cleopatra's ability to outwit them and keep her enemies close was her greatest strength. And even in the face of betrayal, she never let her guard down. Cleopatra's mastery of the family dynamics within her court became a template for her later relationships with Rome, and it would be these same strategies that would ultimately help her form the alliance with Mark Antony, a partnership that would mark the next chapter of her reign. By the time Cleopatra had outmaneuvered her family's rivals and secured her throne, she had proven that she was not merely a queen by title but a force to be reckoned with. But her power was not simply consolidated through political intrigue and familial drama. Cleopatra was also a queen who understood the importance of military strength and leadership. For her, ruling Egypt was not just about navigating court politics or playing the game of Rome, it was about ensuring the survival of her kingdom against ever-present threats. Cleopatra's military involvement was, at first glance, unexpected. Most queens of her time were confined to the palace, managing affairs of the state from a distance. But Cleopatra was deeply involved in military strategy and decision-making, often taking command herself. In this sense, she was ahead of her time, embodying both political and military leadership, a duality that few could match. One of her earliest and most significant military moves came during the struggle for control over Egypt. After being exiled by her brother, she quickly realized that she could not rely solely on diplomacy and cunning. She needed an army that could protect her interests. When she regained her throne with the help of Julius Caesar, Cleopatra also strengthened Egypt's military forces, ensuring that they were well equipped and prepared for any future conflicts. But Cleopatra wasn't just relying on the usual tactics. She also incorporated some innovative strategies. As part of her military campaign to re-establish control, she mobilized Egypt's navy, which played a key role in her eventual victory. She understood the value of a powerful navy, especially given Egypt's geographic location and reliance on maritime trade. She also embraced advanced military technologies of the time, ensuring her forces were outfitted with the best equipment available. However, Cleopatra's most notable military involvement came after the death of Julius Caesar. With the Roman Empire embroiled in internal conflict, Cleopatra saw an opportunity to not only secure her position but also expand her influence beyond Egypt. Her new political partner, Mark Antony, was a Roman general with ambitions of his own, and together they formed a formidable alliance. Their military campaigns were not only about expansion but also about survival. As Antony sought to solidify his power in Rome and eastern territories, Cleopatra's army was crucial in supporting his campaigns. Her navy was instrumental in the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, a pivotal confrontation between Antony and Octavian, later Augustus. Although Cleopatra and Antony's forces were ultimately defeated in the battle, their military efforts were a testament to Cleopatra's strategic thinking and ability to align herself with powerful military figures. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's involvement in military matters was a result of her personal ambition or simply a pragmatic response to the tumultuous political climate of her time. Some say she was a shrewd tactician who understood the need to act decisively. Others suggest that her military campaigns were the result of her desperation to keep Egypt free from Roman domination. Regardless of her motivations, Cleopatra's leadership on the battlefield made her a truly remarkable ruler, one who could balance political, military, and diplomatic concerns with remarkable skill. Though the defeat at Actium would eventually lead to the downfall of both Cleopatra and Antony, it's important to note that Cleopatra's military decisions were rooted in her vision for Egypt's independence. She wasn't simply trying to win battles, she was trying to ensure the long-term survival of her kingdom. And that meant aligning herself with powerful Roman generals, even if it meant putting everything on the line. Cleopatra knew that Egypt could not thrive in isolation. Her kingdom's future was tied to the changing political landscape of Rome. Her military involvement was a necessary part of that strategy. Cleopatra's role as a military leader was not just about the men who fought beside her. It was about her ability to adapt and thrive in a world where women rarely had the opportunity to hold such power. She was not a passive figurehead, but an active participant in the fate of her nation. In a time when warlords and emperors dominated the stage, Cleopatra proved that a woman could lead her armies, make strategic decisions, and protect her kingdom with just as much skill and determination as any man. Despite the loss at Actium, Cleopatra's military legacy was not diminished. She demonstrated that a queen could command respect in the battlefield and was willing to take risks to secure her people's future. While her death in 30 BC marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the end of Egypt's independence, Cleopatra's military leadership would remain one of the many facets that set her apart from other rulers of her time. Cleopatra's relationship with Mark Antony, like her relationship with Julius Caesar, was both politically strategic and personally complicated. But unlike her earlier alliance with Caesar, which was more straightforward, both leaders were using each other for mutual benefit. Her connection with Antony would develop into something far more entangled. Cleopatra and Antony were an unlikely pair. Antony, a seasoned Roman general, was already one of the most powerful men in Rome, while Cleopatra, though Queen of Egypt, was still fighting for her kingdom's survival in a world dominated by Rome. Yet, their relationship would shake the very foundations of the Roman Empire. Cleopatra's attraction to Antony was clear. He was powerful, charismatic, and, like Caesar before him, a man with the potential to offer her the kind of protection and influence she needed to secure her throne. But Antony's political situation was as complex as Cleopatra's own. He was a Roman general with his own ambitions, but he was also an increasingly isolated figure within Rome's political power structure. In his partnership with Cleopatra, Antony found an ally who could help him not only secure his position in Rome but also expand his influence in the East. Their union, both romantic and political, was the result of two powerful forces coming together at a critical moment in history. Antony was facing increasing opposition from his rival Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, and Cleopatra was seeking a powerful partner who could help her retain her kingdom's independence from the looming threat of Roman domination. Together they forged a bond that would alter the course of history. But as always in Cleopatra's world, their relationship would soon become the subject of intense scrutiny, not just from their enemies, but from the Roman populace as well. The couple's love affair became the subject of great gossip and political rhetoric in Rome. Cleopatra, the foreign queen, and Antony, the Roman general, represented everything that the Roman elite despised: foreign influence, luxury, and decadence. Their union wasn't just a scandalous affair. It was a direct challenge to Roman ideals. For the Roman elite, Antony's relationship with Cleopatra was an embarrassment. He had been given the title of consul in Rome, and yet he chose to leave the city and live with Cleopatra in Alexandria. His relationship with the Egyptian queen was seen as a betrayal, not only to Rome but to the values that Roman society cherished. It didn't help that Cleopatra had a child by Antony, a son named Alexander Helios. For the Roman public, this was the final straw. Cleopatra was not just a foreign queen, she was the mother of a child who could potentially lay claim to power in Rome itself. The Romans were quick to assume that Cleopatra had seduced Antony into creating an Eastern empire that could rival Rome. The growing tensions between Antony and Octavian, who was Caesar's adopted son and heir, would only escalate, with Cleopatra's influence in Antony's decisions becoming a major point of contention. Historians still debate the true nature of Cleopatra's influence over Antony. Some suggest that she was a clever manipulator, playing on Antony's weaknesses to secure her own power. Others argue that Antony was not simply under Cleopatra's spell. He had his own ambitions, and the alliance with her was one of convenience as much as affection. Regardless of the truth, their relationship would be the spark that ignited the final conflict between Antony and Octavian, which would ultimately lead to their downfall. The Battle of Actium in 31 BC would prove to be the pivotal moment in their relationship. The combined forces of Cleopatra and Antony faced Octavian's navy in a decisive battle for control of the Mediterranean. The outcome was disastrous for the lovers. Antony's fleet was defeated, and Cleopatra, realizing that the game was over, fled the battlefield with her ships, leaving Antony behind to face the consequences of their defeat. Antony, heartbroken and desperate, would soon commit suicide, followed by Cleopatra, who would take her own life shortly after. The end of Cleopatra and Antony's reign marked the fall of Egypt as an independent kingdom. Octavian, who would become the first emperor of Rome, turned Cleopatra's death into a political victory. Cleopatra, once the most powerful woman in the Mediterranean world, was now nothing more than a footnote in the rise of the Roman Empire. But even in death, Cleopatra's legacy endured. She had outlived most of her rivals and had played her part in one of the most dramatic periods of history. In her final moments, Cleopatra had chosen to end her life on her own terms, rather than be paraded through the streets of Rome as a trophy of Octavian's conquest. Her death may have marked the end of her dynasty, but her story was far from over. Cleopatra's death in 30 BC marked the tragic conclusion of the Ptolemaic dynasty, but her legacy was far from fading into obscurity. The fall of Egypt as an independent kingdom and its annexation by Rome seemed to wipe away her dreams of an Eastern empire that rivaled the power of Rome. Yet, despite her dramatic end, Cleopatra's influence would echo throughout history, leaving an indelible mark on the Mediterranean world. Cleopatra was not just remembered for her intelligence or her political acumen. She became a symbol of feminine power. In an era dominated by male rulers and generals, Cleopatra's ability to wield authority and command armies made her a unique figure. Historians often debate how much of her power was derived from her relationships with Caesar and Antony, but it's clear that her personal abilities were the driving force behind her success. She was a skilled diplomat, an astute strategist, and a queen who didn't just rule a kingdom, she shaped the course of history. In the years following her death, Cleopatra's image continued to captivate the imagination of both her contemporaries and later generations. In ancient Rome, she was often depicted as a seductress and a manipulative foreign queen who had lured powerful Roman men into her web. These portrayals, though they emphasized her beauty and charm, often obscured her true role as a ruler and tactician. For centuries, Cleopatra's legacy was colored by the lens through which the Romans viewed her, a dangerous woman who posed a threat to the Roman Empire. But over time, as the centuries passed, Cleopatra's legacy would evolve. During the Renaissance, for instance, she was resurrected in the arts as a powerful and tragic queen. Writers, poets, and painters began to present Cleopatra not only as a lover of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony but as a tragic heroine caught in the crossfire of imperial ambition. The portrayal of Cleopatra as a complex and multifaceted figure began to take shape, paving the way for modern interpretations of her life. Cleopatra's myth also morphed in the cultural imagination, becoming synonymous with both the exotic allure of Egypt and the ambition of a woman who could rival the greatest Roman emperors. Her story became one of political intrigue, romance, betrayal, and eventual downfall, and as such she became an enduring symbol of the complexities of power and gender. While history had long viewed Cleopatra through a romanticized lens, contemporary scholars have begun to reassess her role in history, focusing on her contributions as a ruler, her diplomatic savvy, and her strategic alliances that helped secure her place as one of the most influential women in ancient history. In literature and the arts, Cleopatra has remained a constant figure of fascination. From Shakespeare's play Antony and Cleopatra to countless films, Cleopatra continues to captivate audiences as a character defined by both strength and vulnerability. Her tragic end, her decision to end her life rather than submit to the humiliation of being paraded through Rome as a captive queen, has fueled her myth as an embodiment of defiance and independence. Her suicide, though tragic, is seen by many as a final assertion of her autonomy, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a dramatic and ultimately symbolic rejection of the Roman Empire's imperial ambitions and an affirmation of her belief in Egypt's independence. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra's suicide was truly a choice or if it was driven by political necessity. Some argue that her death was a final act of defiance against the Roman forces that had conquered her kingdom, while others believe that it was a result of personal despair and loss. But one thing is certain: her death marked the end of Egypt as an independent power and the beginning of a new era in the Mediterranean, one where Rome would rise to unparalleled dominance. But Cleopatra's image and her story would not fade with the passing of time. In fact, her life continues to inspire modern debates about the role of women in power, the ways in which politics and personal relationships intertwine, and the complexities of ruling in a male-dominated world. Cleopatra's story, far from being one of mere beauty or seduction, is one of resilience, ambition, and the struggle to maintain power in a turbulent and unpredictable world. Her legacy is still felt today in both academic discussions and popular culture. Cleopatra's name remains synonymous with intellect, leadership, and, perhaps most importantly, the ability to navigate the treacherous waters of power. She was, and still is, a figure who represents the complexity of leadership in a world where both politics and personal relationships matter. Cleopatra's reign may have ended in tragedy, but her story lives on, reminding us that sometimes the most powerful rulers are not those who conquer kingdoms, but those who understand the intricate dance of power, politics, and personal ambition. Cleopatra's legacy wasn't just shaped by her remarkable political and military maneuvers, but by the enduring image she created in the eyes of those who came after her. In the centuries following her death, Cleopatra transformed from the queen of a once great empire into a symbol of feminine strength, ambition, and tragedy. Her story would become intertwined with the rise of the Roman Empire and serve as a template for future generations of powerful women. In the aftermath of her death, Cleopatra's influence was often viewed through a lens of fascination and romanticism. For the Romans, she was both a political enemy and an exotic mystery. Their portrayal of her was less about her accomplishments and more about her role in the drama between her and Rome's rulers. Many Roman writers, including historians such as Plutarch, turned Cleopatra into an emblem of seductive power, painting her as a temptress who manipulated great men for her own ends. It was a narrative that stripped away her political savvy, reducing her to little more than a seductive queen whose beauty clouded the judgment of her male counterparts. But as time passed, Cleopatra's story evolved beyond these romanticized and often reductive portrayals. In the Renaissance, the rediscovery of ancient texts and the increasing interest in classical history helped paint a more nuanced picture of the Egyptian queen. Writers and artists from Shakespeare to painters such as Jean-André Rixen started to explore Cleopatra as a tragic heroine, not just a seductress. This marked the beginning of Cleopatra's emergence as a symbol of both strength and vulnerability. One of the most iconic moments in Cleopatra's story, and one that has been immortalized in art, literature, and film, is her relationship with Julius Caesar. Their alliance was both romantic and political, and the birth of her son, Caesarion, was seen as an act of defiance against the Roman Empire. For Cleopatra, the birth of Caesarion was a statement that she could not only claim her own power but also assert Egypt's place in the world. For Caesar, it was a connection that could have altered the future of Rome had it not been for his untimely assassination. Historians continue to debate what could have happened had Caesar not been murdered, with some even speculating that Cleopatra and Caesar could have created a new empire together, an empire that stretched from Egypt to the heart of Rome. However, the complexity of Cleopatra's legacy isn't just tied to her personal relationships. It's also about her ability to negotiate power in a world dominated by men. Cleopatra's reign was marked by her constant struggle to keep Egypt independent from the growing Roman Empire. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were driven not only by affection but by necessity. Cleopatra understood that survival required making alliances, even if it meant entangling herself in Roman politics, which ultimately led to her downfall. Yet, despite her tragic end, Cleopatra remains an icon of feminine strength and leadership. Her reign, though short-lived, proved that women could lead armies, shape political discourse, and command the respect of even the most powerful men in the world. Cleopatra was not just a queen who was swept along by the tides of history, she was a queen who actively shaped the course of her nation and the world around her. Her intelligence, political acumen, and ability to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances are qualities that have resonated throughout the ages. Historians today view Cleopatra as more than just a figure caught in the shadows of Rome's imperial ambitions. She is recognized as one of the most politically astute and influential women of her time. Some scholars argue that her use of political and military alliances was not just pragmatic but a form of genius. Cleopatra's ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics while maintaining Egypt's autonomy speaks to her extraordinary skills as a ruler. She was not only a queen but also a master of diplomacy who knew how to use both her personal relationships and her kingdom's resources to her advantage. As we look at the modern world, Cleopatra's story continues to inspire leaders, especially women who seek to assert their authority in traditionally male-dominated spaces. She stands as a reminder that leadership is not defined by gender, but by vision, intelligence, and resilience. Cleopatra was not simply a queen who sat on a throne. She was a strategist, a tactician, and a woman who understood the intricacies of power. Her ability to rule Egypt with authority while managing her relationships with the most powerful men of her time solidified her place as one of history's most influential leaders. Cleopatra's legacy is also one of transformation, both personal and political. Her story reminds us that history is often written by the victors, and that sometimes the truth of a leader's reign is only fully understood in the context of time. Her life, once seen through the lens of romanticism and scandal, is now viewed as a story of remarkable intelligence, political maneuvering, and the courage to fight for what she believed was right. In the end, Cleopatra's story is not just about a queen who lost her throne. It's about a woman who shaped the world in ways that continue to be felt today. As we move deeper into the story of Cleopatra, it's impossible to ignore the lasting impact she has had on the world and how her image has been shaped by history. Cleopatra's death in 30 BC did not signal the end of her legacy. In fact, the way she is remembered, and often misunderstood, has created a narrative that has been reshaped time and time again. Her image has gone through various transformations, each reflecting the values and ideologies of the times in which they were created. One of the most interesting aspects of Cleopatra's legacy is how it has been used and reimagined throughout history. In the immediate aftermath of her death, Cleopatra was depicted as the villain, the manipulative, seductive queen who had entranced two of Rome's greatest men. The portrayal of Cleopatra as a femme fatale, a manipulator of men, overshadowed her political acumen and leadership skills for centuries. Roman writers like Plutarch and Dio Cassius contributed to this image, casting her as a dangerous foreign queen whose ambitions threatened the stability of Rome. The Roman view of Cleopatra was deeply colored by the political climate of the time. Following the defeat of Mark Antony at Actium, Rome's victory was not only a military one, it was a cultural and ideological conquest as well. Cleopatra, who had been an integral part of Antony's downfall, was made into a symbol of the Eastern world's threat to Roman order and values. In the Roman narrative, Cleopatra was portrayed as a woman who used her beauty and charm to ensnare powerful men, reinforcing the Roman belief that women who wielded power were ultimately a threat to civilization. This stereotype persisted for centuries, shaping how Cleopatra was remembered in the Western world. But as we moved into the Renaissance and later periods, Cleopatra's image began to evolve. Artists and writers during the Renaissance found Cleopatra to be a fascinating figure, but they reimagined her as a tragic heroine rather than a villain. This shift was influenced by the period's growing interest in ancient history and the complex nature of human character. In Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, the queen is portrayed as a woman who is deeply passionate, strong, and politically astute, but ultimately tragic. The play captures the essence of Cleopatra as a powerful, multidimensional figure, rather than a simple seductress. In the centuries that followed, Cleopatra became a symbol of both feminine strength and vulnerability. The 19th and 20th centuries in particular saw a surge of interest in Cleopatra as a romantic figure. She was often depicted as a tragic queen whose love for Antony led to her downfall, a woman whose personal relationships were entwined with the fate of empires. This image of Cleopatra has been popularized in numerous films, with the most famous portrayal being Elizabeth Taylor's portrayal of Cleopatra in the 1963 film. Taylor's Cleopatra was lavish, seductive, and powerful, embodying the romanticized image of the queen that had developed over centuries. Yet, while these portrayals focused on Cleopatra's relationships and her beauty, they often overlooked the true complexity of her reign. Cleopatra wasn't just defined by her love affairs. She was a brilliant ruler who navigated the intricacies of diplomacy, military strategy, and political power. Historians today are beginning to challenge the traditional narrative that has long depicted Cleopatra as a mere seductress, instead recognizing her as a political genius who skillfully used her alliances to protect and elevate Egypt on the world stage. Historians still debate the true nature of Cleopatra's power. Was she truly the manipulative seductress that Roman writers depicted? Or was she a woman who understood how to wield the tools of power in a male-dominated world? Cleopatra's ability to navigate the treacherous political waters of both Egypt and Rome speaks to her deep intelligence and her understanding of how to achieve her goals. Some argue that she used her relationships with powerful men to further Egypt's interests, and that her alliances were as much about strategy as they were about affection. Others suggest that Cleopatra's personal relationships were deeply entangled with her political ambitions, making her story one of love, loss, and betrayal as much as it is about power and survival. Regardless of how we choose to interpret Cleopatra's actions, one thing is certain: her legacy has endured for over 2,000 years. Cleopatra's life, her reign, and her dramatic end have captured the imagination of countless generations. She remains one of the most iconic figures in history, symbolizing both the possibilities and the limitations of female power in a patriarchal world. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of Cleopatra's legacy is how she has inspired people throughout history, particularly women. Her story is one of resilience, adaptability, and strategic thinking. She was not just a queen who ruled an empire. She was a woman who understood the intricacies of power and used her intellect, her relationships, and her position to leave an indelible mark on the world. Cleopatra's story continues to inspire not only historians but also artists, filmmakers, and writers. As society continues to evolve, so too does Cleopatra's legacy. No longer is she simply remembered as a seductress. She is celebrated as a ruler who made bold decisions, a woman who ruled an empire with wit and wisdom, and a figure whose complex legacy challenges us to rethink our perceptions of power and leadership. As we reflect on Cleopatra's life, we can't help but wonder: if she had been born in a different time, would the world have remembered her differently? Would history have recognized her as one of the greatest rulers of all time, without the shadow of her romantic entanglements? Cleopatra's story, with all its twists and turns, continues to be one of the most fascinating and enduring tales in human history. The question of how Cleopatra would be remembered had she been born in a different era is intriguing, and it points to one of the most fascinating aspects of her legacy: the way she has been interpreted and reinterpreted over time. It's not just her story that's been passed down, it's how her story has been told, shaped, and reshaped by the cultures and societies that have encountered her. In some ways, Cleopatra is a reflection of the time she lived in and the lens through which her story has been told. If Cleopatra were alive today, there's no doubt she would be remembered differently. The 21st century, with its emphasis on gender equality, political empowerment, and the rise of female leaders across the globe, might have heralded Cleopatra not as a seductress or a tragic figure, but as a master of diplomacy and a formidable leader. Imagine Cleopatra in the modern political landscape, a woman who leveraged intelligence, charm, and power to negotiate with the world's leaders, a strategist who understood how to balance personal relationships with political ambition, all while maintaining the sovereignty of her nation. She would be celebrated as a woman who fought fiercely to ensure her country's place in the global order. The contrast between the modern interpretation of Cleopatra and the one that was created during her own time and for centuries thereafter reveals much about how societies view powerful women. For much of history, Cleopatra's image was tainted by a narrative that often sought to diminish her authority by emphasizing her relationships with men rather than her political acumen. In the context of ancient Rome, where women were generally relegated to the background of political life, Cleopatra's boldness in ruling Egypt and aligning herself with the two most powerful men of the time, Caesar and Antony, was both a remarkable and threatening act. To the Roman elite, Cleopatra was a foreign queen whose influence over their leaders posed a direct challenge to Roman ideals. By diminishing her role as a leader and reducing her to a seductress, the Romans were able to justify their conquest of Egypt and, in many ways, erase her as a serious political force. Yet, despite the centuries of negative portrayals, Cleopatra's true role as a leader has been rediscovered in more recent years. Scholars have begun to acknowledge the complexity of her reign and the political savvy she demonstrated throughout her life. They've shifted the narrative from one of romance and scandal to one of resilience and strategy. Cleopatra's ability to maneuver through the ever-changing political landscape of the Mediterranean world was not the result of her allure alone. It was her understanding of power and politics that made her one of the most effective rulers of her time. Her legacy, then, is not confined to the boundaries of her own era. It is a legacy that continues to evolve, as each generation reinterprets her life in light of contemporary values and issues. In many ways, Cleopatra's story is still being written, and it will continue to inspire future generations. Cleopatra's impact on the Mediterranean world was profound, but her legacy transcended the borders of her kingdom. After her death, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire, and while the Ptolemaic dynasty ended with her passing, Cleopatra's influence lived on. Her son, Caesarion, was executed by Octavian, and Egypt was absorbed into Rome. But Cleopatra had left an indelible mark on Roman culture, politics, and military affairs. The connections she forged between Egypt and Rome set the stage for centuries of interaction between the two empires. Her diplomatic strategies and ability to secure alliances were integral to the way Rome eventually came to rule much of the Mediterranean world. Even in her death, Cleopatra was not easily forgotten. For the Romans, her legacy was something to be feared, even as they continued to adapt and learn from her strategies. The image of Cleopatra was woven into Roman political rhetoric, and her name would live on in the minds of the Romans as a symbol of the East's seductive power. Over the centuries, however, Cleopatra would evolve from a symbol of the Eastern threat into a cultural icon, revered for her wisdom, beauty, and political skill. Throughout the Middle Ages, Cleopatra's story was largely forgotten or distorted, often reduced to myths and legends. But during the Renaissance, as European scholars and artists rediscovered the ancient world, Cleopatra was reborn as a figure of artistic and literary fascination. Writers such as William Shakespeare, poets like John Dryden, and painters like Jean-André Rixens reimagined her life and reign. Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra presented her as a tragic heroine who was deeply in love with Antony but also a skilled manipulator of politics. In the Renaissance, Cleopatra became both a symbol of romantic idealism and tragic loss, a queen caught between love and duty. By the time we reached the modern era, Cleopatra's image had shifted once again. The fascination with her life and reign reached new heights, with movies like Elizabeth Taylor's iconic portrayal in the 1963 film Cleopatra, which became one of the most famous cinematic representations of her. This portrayal, full of opulence and grandeur, highlighted her beauty and charm while emphasizing the dramatic romantic aspects of her life. But even here, in the lavish costumes and sweeping sets, Cleopatra's intelligence and political machinations were still an integral part of her portrayal. She wasn't just a love interest, she was a ruler, someone who changed the fate of nations. Today, Cleopatra's legacy continues to be explored, re-examined, and celebrated. As scholars uncover more about her reign, and as women in positions of power continue to rise, Cleopatra remains a symbol of what is possible when a woman is given the opportunity to rule in her own right. Her legacy has gone from being that of a seductress to a queen whose intelligence, ambition, and courage reshaped the world. And as history continues to be written, Cleopatra's story, with all its twists, turns, triumphs, and tragedies, will undoubtedly continue to inspire generations to come. Cleopatra's legacy, though complex and multifaceted, is ultimately one of endurance. Her ability to adapt, survive, and manipulate the political systems around her left a blueprint for rulers throughout history, especially women in positions of power. Yet, the true measure of Cleopatra's influence lies in the way she continues to inspire and provoke thought even thousands of years after her death. What is it about her life that captivates us so? Perhaps it's the way she exemplifies the tension between personal ambition and public responsibility, or the sheer brilliance with which she managed her relationships with men who were her allies and rivals in equal measure. What Cleopatra did in her time was not just rule, but thrive in a world designed to keep women in the background. Her strength and determination challenged the assumptions of what it meant to be a woman in a time when women were seen as mere pawns in the grander game of power. Cleopatra's reign stands as evidence of the power that can emerge when women are given the opportunity to lead. It's no wonder that her story has resonated so strongly with modern audiences, who see in her a symbol of feminine strength, intelligence, and self-determination. The fascinating aspect of Cleopatra's life is that she was both an icon of empowerment and a victim of the political system she was forced to navigate. Her position as both a queen and a woman in a male-dominated world meant that every decision she made was carefully calculated, every move weighed with the knowledge that failure could cost her the throne, or even her life. And yet, despite these overwhelming odds, she was able to not only maintain her rule but also carve out a space for Egypt in the political landscape of the Roman world. Her story challenges us to reconsider the way we view power, gender, and leadership. For centuries, Cleopatra's image has been marred by stereotypes, mostly crafted by those who sought to reduce her to a seductress or a tragic lover. But as modern scholarship continues to shed light on her reign, we come to realize that Cleopatra was not a passive figure swept along by the tides of history. She was an active participant in the drama of her time, a woman who knew how to leverage the circumstances around her to secure her own survival and the future of her people. But beyond the politics, beyond the alliances and betrayals, Cleopatra's greatest contribution may have been her ability to embody the culture she ruled. She was, in every sense, a queen of Egypt, not just by birthright but by virtue of her connection to its ancient traditions and people. Her knowledge of Egyptian religion, culture, and governance allowed her to become a living symbol of Egypt's glory, and her ability to fuse the Egyptian and Greek worlds made her a figure unlike any other in the ancient world. While the Ptolemaic dynasty may have been Greek in origin, Cleopatra became the quintessential Egyptian ruler, a direct descendant of the pharaohs, and a leader who understood the deep cultural currents that shaped her people. As much as Cleopatra is remembered for her alliances with the great men of her time, Caesar and Antony, she is also remembered for her ability to think independently. She recognized the importance of Rome but was never fully swayed by its influence. She built her empire on her own terms, balancing diplomacy, military strategy, and personal relationships with a deftness that few rulers could match. Even when she faced overwhelming opposition from Octavian, she held steadfast to her beliefs, and her death was an ultimate assertion of that unyielding spirit. Cleopatra's legacy is a reminder that power is not just about military might or political cunning. It's about resilience and the ability to maintain one's agency in a world that constantly tries to diminish you. Her legacy lives on not just in the history books, but in the many ways she has influenced the world of leadership, feminism, and cultural identity. Today, she serves as an icon for women seeking power, for leaders navigating complex political landscapes, and for anyone who has ever fought against the odds to secure a place for themselves in history. Cleopatra's story continues to be told, reimagined, and celebrated in countless ways, each telling a version of a queen whose influence transcends time. But more than that, Cleopatra's life speaks to the power of resilience in the face of adversity. Her ability to reinvent herself, navigate shifting political alliances, and maintain the integrity of her rule amidst the growing power of Rome is what truly makes her a figure for the ages. She did not allow herself to be defined by the limitations of her gender or her station. She defined her own path, and in doing so, she became an enduring symbol of empowerment and leadership. As we reflect on her life, we are reminded that history is not only written by the victors, but also by those who defy the odds, who refuse to be defined by the circumstances of their birth or the expectations of others. Cleopatra's enduring legacy is, at its core, a lesson in the power of agency, independence, and the will to shape one's own destiny. And as history marches forward, Cleopatra's name will continue to echo through the ages, not as a passive figure of the past, but as a testament to the strength, intelligence, and resilience of women who refuse to be forgotten. As we continue to explore Cleopatra's legacy, one of the most intriguing aspects is the ongoing scholarly debate about the true nature of her power. Was Cleopatra a master of manipulation and manipulation alone, or was she a brilliant political leader who utilized her full range of abilities to secure Egypt's place in the Mediterranean world? Historians are still divided over the question of how much of Cleopatra's reign was shaped by her relationships with powerful men like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and how much of her success was the result of her own innate political acumen. One point of contention among historians is whether Cleopatra's personal relationships with these men were simply strategic alliances or if they were genuine emotional bonds. Some argue that Cleopatra's affair with Julius Caesar was purely a political move, an alliance meant to secure her position in Egypt. After all, Caesar's arrival in Egypt was timed perfectly with Cleopatra's exile, and his support was crucial to her return to power. It's tempting to view Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar as a pragmatic step in a much larger political game. After all, Caesar was the most powerful man in Rome, and an alliance with him would ensure Cleopatra's reign. However, the fact that Cleopatra had a child with Caesar, Caesarion, complicates this interpretation. While many have argued that Cleopatra's actions were motivated purely by political calculation, the birth of Caesarion suggests that there was more to their relationship than mere convenience. Perhaps Cleopatra saw in Caesar not only a political partner but also a personal one. She may have genuinely believed in the potential of their union, which could have reshaped the balance of power between Rome and Egypt. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra was truly in love with Caesar, or whether her relationship with him was simply a means to an end. Similarly, Cleopatra's relationship with Mark Antony has been the subject of intense scrutiny. The romanticized image of the two lovers has dominated popular culture for centuries, but their relationship was also a deeply political one. Antony was facing his own challenges within the Roman political structure, and his partnership with Cleopatra was undoubtedly influenced by the geopolitical realities of the time. Together, they forged an alliance that was intended to challenge the growing power of Octavian, Julius Caesar's heir and the future Augustus. But as we've seen throughout history, the intersection of politics and romance is often a dangerous one. Cleopatra and Antony's alliance ultimately led to their downfall. The Battle of Actium in 31 BC was a catastrophic loss for the pair, and it marked the end of Cleopatra's reign and the beginning of Egypt's absorption into the Roman Empire. Yet, even in their defeat, Cleopatra and Antony's story remains one of the most compelling tales of love, loyalty, and political ambition in world history. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's involvement with Antony was born out of genuine affection or whether she saw in him the opportunity to secure Egypt's future. The fact that Cleopatra continued her relationship with Antony after Caesar's death suggests that she was not merely using him as a political pawn, but rather saw him as a key player in her plans for Egypt's independence. But was Cleopatra's love for Antony genuine, or was it just another political calculation? It's a question that continues to intrigue scholars today. Despite the romanticized portrayals of Cleopatra's relationships with Caesar and Antony, it's important to remember that she was first and foremost a ruler. Her ability to maintain Egypt's independence in a world where Rome was growing increasingly powerful speaks to her extraordinary diplomatic skill. Cleopatra was not just a passive figure in her relationships with Caesar and Antony. She was a proactive force who used her alliances to further her own ambitions and those of her kingdom. Cleopatra's diplomacy was key to her success. She understood the importance of timing, negotiation, and maintaining a delicate balance between power and vulnerability. She was not just a queen who relied on others to advance her cause. She actively sought out the alliances that would ensure her kingdom's survival. In many ways, Cleopatra was ahead of her time, using her intelligence and charm to navigate a political landscape that was dominated by men. But Cleopatra's true legacy lies not just in her personal relationships, but in her ability to wield power effectively. She understood the complexities of both Egyptian and Roman politics and knew how to use these complexities to her advantage. She was not content to simply be a figurehead. She was a ruler who took an active role in shaping the direction of her kingdom. Cleopatra was a woman who recognized that power was not just about force or domination. It was about negotiation, alliances, and understanding the shifting tides of politics. In the end, Cleopatra's reign was a testament to the power of resilience and adaptability. Despite the many challenges she faced, both personal and political, she managed to carve out a space for herself as one of the most influential leaders of her time. She may not have been able to prevent Egypt's absorption into the Roman Empire, but her legacy as a skilled diplomat, a powerful ruler, and a complex woman continues to resonate through history. Cleopatra's legacy, then, is one of complexity and contradiction. She was a ruler who faced impossible odds, yet she rose to meet them. She was a woman who used her intelligence and charm to navigate a world that was not kind to women in power, and yet she succeeded in becoming one of the most famous leaders of all time. Cleopatra's story is not just the story of a queen who fell in love with the wrong men. It is the story of a woman who defied the odds and left an indelible mark on history. As we come to the final chapter of Cleopatra's story, it's important to reflect on the enduring impact of her life, not just in the context of ancient history, but in the way her legacy continues to influence us today. Cleopatra's reign, her political acumen, and her personal relationships have long fascinated historians, scholars, and artists, but they've also sparked broader questions about power, gender, and leadership. What does it mean to be a powerful woman in a world that seeks to diminish your authority? How do you balance love, ambition, and survival when everything is at stake? Cleopatra's life challenges these questions, offering answers that are both complex and multifaceted. Cleopatra, as we have seen, was not just a queen who lived in the shadows of powerful men. She was a ruler in her own right, capable of navigating the political and military complexities of her time with remarkable skill. Her ability to survive and thrive in a world dominated by men was not merely a product of her beauty or charm. It was a result of her intellect, her strategic thinking, and her ability to use every tool at her disposal to protect her kingdom. Her diplomatic prowess was as important as her military and political alliances. She understood that leadership is not just about the power you wield, but about how you use it to shape the world around you. But Cleopatra's story doesn't end with her death. Her legacy lives on not only in the history books but in the way we continue to tell her story. The Cleopatra we remember today is not just the seductress or the tragic lover, but a woman who defied the conventions of her time and forged a path for herself as one of the most powerful and influential rulers in history. This modern interpretation of Cleopatra speaks to the ongoing relevance of her life. In a world where women continue to fight for power and recognition, Cleopatra's story is a reminder of what can be achieved when one refuses to be defined by society's limitations. Perhaps one of the most enduring aspects of Cleopatra's legacy is how she has been reimagined by artists, filmmakers, and writers over the centuries. From Shakespeare's portrayal of her as a tragic lover to Elizabeth Taylor's iconic performance in the 1963 film, Cleopatra has been shaped and reshaped to reflect the values and ideals of each era. These portrayals have often emphasized her beauty and sensuality, but they have also highlighted her intelligence, her strength, and her role as a political leader. Through these reinterpretations, Cleopatra has remained a relevant figure, one who continues to inspire and provoke. In today's world, Cleopatra is often viewed through a more nuanced lens. She is no longer just a queen who lost her kingdom or a lover who captured the hearts of powerful men. She is recognized as a strategist, a ruler, and a woman who fought for her people and her nation's survival. Her story is one of resilience, of using every resource at her disposal to fight for what she believed in. It is a reminder that leadership, particularly for women, is not just about holding power, It is about using that power to make a difference, to change the course of history, and to ensure the survival of what you hold dear. And yet, despite all the progress we've made in recognizing the true scope of her influence, there is still something inherently tragic about Cleopatra's story. Her death, which followed so closely on the heels of her defeat at Actium, marks the end of an era. Egypt, which had once been one of the most powerful kingdoms in the ancient world, was absorbed into the Roman Empire, and Cleopatra's dreams of an independent Egypt were dashed. She went from being one of the most powerful rulers of the Mediterranean world to a symbol of loss and decline. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of her death is not just that she was defeated. It's that her legacy has often been reduced to a simple narrative of love and loss, when in reality she was a ruler whose strength and vision should have been celebrated in its own right. But Cleopatra's story is far from over. She continues to be a symbol of feminine power and resilience. Her story resonates not just because of her relationships with men or her tragic end, but because she represents something much more enduring: the ability to rise above adversity, to survive in a world that is stacked against you, and to carve out a space for yourself and your people. Cleopatra's legacy challenges us to reconsider what it means to be a woman in power, and it offers a model for future generations of leaders, particularly women, who will continue to navigate the complexities of politics, power, and identity in a world that is constantly changing. So, as we close this chapter of Cleopatra's life, we are left with one final question. What would she have accomplished had she been given more time? Would she have been able to lead Egypt into a new era, one where the country could stand independent and strong, free from the shackles of Roman domination? We will never know. But what we do know is that Cleopatra's influence endures. Through her alliances, her strength, her intelligence, and her unwavering determination. She was more than just a queen. She was a ruler, a strategist, a survivor. And her legacy will continue to inspire all those who seek to defy the odds and carve out their own place in history.